So John chapter 10 is the story of, it's a metaphor, maybe, a parable, or the NIV calls it a figure of speech. So I don't know what we want to classify this as, but it's said specifically to the Pharisees, and it's the story of the good shepherd. And of course, if there's a good shepherd, there's got to be some bad shepherds and some thieves and some robbers who are jumping over fences to try to steal, kill, and destroy. So that's the text that we're going through. And as I was preparing for this sermon, I started to think about just all the false shepherds that are out there. And I have to do that because if you look at John chapter 10, verse 1, it says, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees." And so without question, the section that we're talking about tonight was Jesus telling the Pharisees something. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have application for us, but we just have to first maybe find out what it meant for those Pharisees. And what Jesus is going to do is he's going to compare himself, the good shepherd, the model shepherd, to the Pharisees, who might be the thieves or the robbers. They might be the hired hands. Either way, they're not the kind of leaders that you would want taking care of your sheep. And so I started thinking this week about false shepherds or anti-shepherds, maybe even like teachers that maybe lead you down the wrong path. And I started thinking about this book. I was at Bob's Shell putting gas in the church van about a year ago. And that's about how often we have to put gas in the van right now because we just haven't been using it a lot. But I was at Bob's Shell putting gas in the van. And like usual, you go to the gas station and you got to clean out all the kids' junk that's in there, the candy bar wrappers and all of that, the half-drinking Gatorades. And so I clear it all out and I go to throw it into the trash, and I found this book in the trash. And it looked like a new book. I was super excited about it. It's called The Grand Weaver. And it's written by Ravi Zacharias. Now, how many people know who Ravi Zacharias is? And I was a huge fan of Ravi Zacharias. I followed him. I read his books. My library was full. He's somebody who had a worldwide international ministry, specifically on apologetics, but not just apologetics. He talked about other topics. For instance, this book is how God shapes us through the events in our lives, which is interesting. How God shapes us through the events in our lives. And so I was a big fan of Ravi Zacharias. And in May of 2020, he died of cancer. And once he died, the events of his life started coming to the surface. And now if you followed Ravi Zacharias, you also know that this isn't going to turn out to be too good either. Because Ravi Zacharias had lived a double life. He was an international speaker and led many people to Christ. But in the background, he also owned massage parlors. And as they started to dig through his phone and into his life, they found allegations of rape and abuse and pornography. And they began to investigate it. And lo and behold, it comes up to be true. There's stories of him telling women that they are his gift from God and a reward for his hard work. He told one lady that if she tells anybody about the abuse that's happening, that she'll be responsible for all the souls that will be lost whenever the word of his abuse gets out. And all of a sudden, my hero, right? Somebody that, not just me, I mean, people around the world really liked this guy. All of a sudden, my hero became somebody who was a scoundrel, someone who was an anti-shepherd. He was definitely called, he was definitely somebody who attempted to lead a flock, but really, whenever it came down to it, what was he trying to get? It was what he could have, the power that he could control over others. See, Jesus comes to give life. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And for many people, that began a deconstruction process. Do I really believe this Christianity thing at all? Because after all, if these people are Christians and they believe what they say they believe, then how could they live like this? And so lots of people began to step away because this person who was supposed to lead God's people led them away because of the lifestyle that he lived. It's just ironic. His book is called How God Shapes Us Through the Events of our Lives. And his life shaped so many people, and then destroyed so many people in the same hand, right? He's not alone in this. In fact, like if you've been a Christian for any amount of time, you've met people that let you down, leaders in ministry that you looked up to, that you thought, this guy or this girl, she has got it together, or they have got it together. And then as you get closer, you realize, well, first of all, everybody's imperfect, right? And so there's that side of it. Nobody's going to be able to hit the level of person that you are looking for, because there's only one good shepherd, right? There's only one good shepherd, the model shepherd. And so, like even as I've gone through my own life and my own walk, there have been people who have let me down, people who I looked up to that I found out later were living this double life. And it's hard for new Christians. It's hard for Christians that have been Christians for a long time. Like, I looked up to you, and this is what you do. This is how you act. And so I bring up this story because John chapter 10 has to first be understood in relation to the Pharisees, because Jesus is talking to Pharisees, and what he's going to do is he's going to compare them and how they are leading to how he is leading, right? And it should be a reminder to us of this. It should remind us as Christians that in this world, there are going to be people that let you down. There are going to be people that you look up to, but are really the anti-shepherds. They come really to steal, kill, destroy. And that's just part of life. But as Christians, we don't idolize people, right? We look up to Christ. He's the good shepherd, the one that knows his sheep, and the one who we should hear his voice and follow him, right? So there's also a challenge for us in this, that as people, we have to make sure that we can identify the voice of the good shepherd as opposed to those voices that might sound good, but really just be trying to take advantage of the sheep. And so here we are, John chapter 10. It's if you look at verse 5, it says, verse 6, it says, Jesus used this figure of speech. I'm just pointing this out, like it's not called a parable. If anything, it's a metaphor. But some people call it a parable. It's got a lot of the elements of a parable. It's just not the word used for parable. It's the word used for figure of speech or metaphor. So the metaphor or figure of speech starts in verse 1. Here's what it says. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief or a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he has brought them out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Like, this is a metaphor, figure of speech said to the Pharisees. And who doesn't understand it? The Pharisees. Me either this week, by the way. I was like looking at this, and I've read this lots of times, taught on it lots of times, but still it's a little bit complicated. It's a metaphor with a lot of different characters. You've got the sheep and the shepherd and the thieves, the robbers. You've got the gate, the gatekeeper. You've got lots of different characters, and trying to identify those can be quite the task. But it's just a reminder that because Jesus is talking to Pharisees, their role was to be a shepherd to the people, right? Think of all the leaders of Israel, the ones that kind of capped off each milestone in Israel's history. You've got Moses, right? The law, the Torah. And what was he doing when God called him? He was out there shepherding his sheep. And then he saw a bush that just didn't seem to burn up. And then he went to the bush. And that's where God called him to say, go and shepherd or deliver my people. What do you have? You have the staff in my hand. What do shepherds hold? Staffs. Right? So shepherds are meant to be like this symbol, like you're leading God's people. David was out there, just this little boy out there shepherding sheep when God called him and told Samuel to crown him as king or to anoint him as king. And shepherds. That's kind of the way that as Christians or as the people of Israel, you look to your leaders. They're supposed to shepherd the flock, which is God's people. So that's you, by the way. You're the sheep. I know you don't like that sometimes, right? A bunch of sheep. That's you. You're the sheep. You follow, right? But Jesus, when he comes onto the scene in Mark, it says he looked at the people with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd, right? So these Pharisees were supposed to be leading. They're supposed to be the ones that were leading the flock to good pasture, to quiet waters, back into the safety of the pen. But instead, they were leaving the sheep alone, afraid, without a shepherd to guide them. See, maybe they were more worried about other things, like when they prayed, they wanted everybody to look at them. When they fasted, they disfigured their faces so that everyone would see them. See, Jesus calls them a hypocrite, right? Like you've lived this double life, kind of like the author I was talking about a minute ago. And many Christians, or many people who still lead today, hypocrites, right? They're inside the church, they're outside of the church. Anybody that you lead that's trying to take advantage of the sheep, that are you led by, that is trying to take advantage of the sheep, those are false shepherds. But see, they come in an alternate way. They jump the wall, right? The good shepherd, he comes by the gate. And here's the cool thing about the good shepherd. He calls his sheep by name. Now, I don't know what their name is. Like, you guys went with some weird names, but I'm thinking sheep names, Fuzzy and maybe Floppy and Q-Tip. That's a good one. I didn't think about that one. But you've got these cool sheep names, and the good shepherd is showing up, and he's calling his sheep by name, and his sheep follow him. And now, if you don't know what a sheep pen is, oftentimes it would be backed up against a mountain, but it would be just like a fenced-in area, right? They would stack rocks maybe to build their fence, and it would have one opening, which would be the gate, the door, the entrance, right? Now, if you're coming in through the sides, something's wrong. But the good shepherd, he comes in through the door, right? And he calls to his sheep, and his sheep hear his voice, and they follow. Because he knows them by name, Q-Tip, right? And they follow, right? But here's the thing. They won't follow somebody who is not the shepherd. Verse 5, they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they don't recognize the stranger's voice. There's a couple things that I just want to point out as we go through this. Like the shepherd, that's going to be Jesus. The gate's going to be Jesus. And you guys are going to be the sheep. And it's a challenge to us to make sure that we know the voice of the shepherd, right? So there is something you guys got to do in this text. There is something that you guys got to do. You have to know the voice of the shepherd, and faith comes by hearing. It comes by studying. It comes by learning his word, and as you learn his word, you'll know the shepherd, right? That's so great. Here's my first point. If I'm looking for points, the first point is this. Jesus is the gate that leads to salvation, right? Jesus is the gate that leads to salvation. Now, Jesus has to explain this metaphor, this figure of speech, this parable. He's got to explain it because although it was meant for the Pharisees, they don't understand it, and now he's going to break it down. And when he breaks it down, in verse 7, he says, therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I am the gate for the sheep. Now, if you're keeping track in the book of John, this is the third I am plus a subject, right? Like I am, remember, I am the bread of life. And anybody who eats, right? That's the idea. Like Jesus gives us this life that satisfies, right? His flesh and his blood. That's John chapter 6. Then later on, Jesus says, I am, and then he supplies light. And it's this idea that Jesus is that revelation, right? In the beginning, God said, let there be light. Or you can think of the light that as the people wandered in the wilderness, following a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, they never had to walk in darkness. When we accept the truth that Jesus is light, we don't have to walk in darkness. And let's be honest, we've spent enough time in the darkness, right? So the third one is this one. It's I'm the gate. And not just the gate, he's the gate for the sheep, right? And I was kind of thinking, like, what is it that gates do? Like, you guys know it. The same word for gate is also door. It's also like an entrance. The idea is that, like, you can only go in and out if you use the gate. And that's what Jesus does. He provides access, right? Now, maybe you could think of it as in like this safety feature, right? No one can get into the sheep pen unless they go through the gate. Otherwise, they have to climb the fence And let's be honest, we all know who those people are, right? So maybe it's like a safety door, but I really think more than a safety door, Jesus is that gate which leads us to life, salvation for the sheep, right? And that could look two ways. The sheep pen was supposed to be a place of safety. And sometimes you'd put something over the gate so the sheep couldn't escape. It's other times the shepherd would just lay there and he himself was the gate. And I kind of think that might be what's going on in this parable, because Jesus is going to call himself the shepherd too. Like the sheep pen itself was supposed to be a place of safety. Lots of different shepherds would lead their sheep into this pen. It would be like a community pen. But when the shepherd calls the sheep, know his voice and they come out. So it's an idea of safety, but not only is it an idea of safety, the gate also lets the sheep out. And where do they go when they go out? To pasture, to green fields and quiet waters, right? That's Psalm 23. And if you really want this image of a sheep and a shepherd and the kind of love that the shepherd shows for his sheep, go home today and just read Psalm 23. Or you'll find a shepherd that leads and guides so that you don't require anything. Jesus is that gate which allows access and safety. He goes on in this and says, all who come before me, they are thieves and robbers. The sheep have not listened to them. I'm the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. For sheep, that means no wolf is going to eat you. For us, we don't have to worry about the consequences. The death has no victory over us. It has no more sting. And then he goes on to say, they will come in and out and find pasture. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. So I just want you to see the comparison between the thief and the gate, right? What does the thief come to do? Destroy, kill, steal. What is the gate? Life, salvation. And we should know the difference, right? Now, in my mind, I've always thought of the thief in this story as being Satan, and a comparison between Satan, who comes to steal, kill, destroy, and Jesus, who comes to give life to the abundance. But I don't know that it has to be Satan. See, I think there are lots of people preying on God's sheep. Like this guy was just one of them, right? And you can go online and you can watch other videos of other mega churches that and they're not just mega churches, but one is popular right now. And you can find out how they take advantage of the sheep. See, here's the thing. I think what happens as sheep is we have to learn to distinguish between the thief and the gate. And that's your job, right? Jesus is allowing access in and out, but the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Who are you going to follow? Right? Because there are lots of false shepherds out there, whether it's political leaders, spiritual leaders. Like, what is it that you put? Like, who are you following in your life? Because there's only one way in to safety and one way out to safety, to good pastures, to quiet waters. So Jesus says he's the gate. And I want to make this point real quick because I think it's important. It's in Acts chapter 2, and it's in Acts chapter 4, and it's in verse 12. Here's what it says. Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. I just want to point that out because like Jesus doesn't say he is one of the gates. In fact, these sheep pens, they only have one entry, one exit. Like they're the same gate. And when Peter says that, he's pointing out that Jesus is the only way to find salvation. He's not a new way. He's not the next way. He's not just one of many ways. He's the only gate, the only way, the only truth, the only life. And that's where Jesus gets into this idea of him being the gate. My second point is that Jesus is the shepherd. See, this is the fourth I am statement. It's in verse 11. He says, I am the good shepherd. So not only is he just any shepherd, he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his friends. So Jesus is the good shepherd that lays his life down for his sheep. This is probably the more famous of the I am statements. Like we know Jesus is bread, but we don't, walk around talking about Jesus as bread very often. Well, every Sunday maybe. But we know Jesus is light, right? But like from the earliest times, the picture of Jesus being a shepherd has been what is primary in the way that they talk about them, right? And there's a couple reasons. Like Jesus is that good shepherd. And I'm going to go back, Kathy. I'm going to read from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 10 and 11, because Jesus is this shepherd kind of like what God says he is to his people. In verse 10 of chapter 40 of Isaiah, it says, "See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him. His recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those who have young." Like, think about the Jesus as the good shepherd. What a great metaphor for the person of Jesus, who really knows and cares about you. He knows your name, Floppy, right? He knows it. He loves and cares for you, just like one of those tiny lambs that he carries in his arm close to his heart. That Hebrew word for heart is like the central part, like the heart of the city, right? It's everything flows through it. But also he cares for those lambs or those sheep that just had their young. He waits for them. He's patient, right? Jesus is that good shepherd. And what makes him good is not just the way that he loves and cares for his sheep. What makes him good is that he's willing to lay his life down for his sheep. See, there's the shepherds that are called hired hands. They don't care quite so much for their sheep, right? In verse 12, it says, "The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." And that's what happens when you have no buy-in, no care, no love for the sheep. And sadly, there are a lot of people that are following false shepherds that when the first time of trouble comes, they're out of there. And these people are left to the dangers of the world, which in this metaphor is the wolves who want to steal, kill, destroy. They want to eat sheep. And that's you guys. And so again, here's a challenge that we have to not only know the voice of the shepherd, but you also have to make sure that you are not following the false shepherd, right? And you have to watch out for wolves. Jesus goes on to say this in verse 14. He says it again. "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and they know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." I want to key in on that word "know," right? Because the word "know" is not like I know about. It's I know intimately, right? See, if I read an autobiography or just a biography about someone, I might learn about them, but I don't know that person, right? The word for know in the Bible is that same word that talks about the kind of intimacy that a husband and wife are in when they are first married, right? But it doesn't have to just be like a sexual type of intimacy, right? In fact, the kind of intimacy that Jesus is talking about when he says, "I know my sheep," just as I am known and know the Father, is the kind of relationship that he has with the Father. Now, I'm a father, and I can tell you all about my kids. I know my kids, right? I know a lot about them, more than you guys would ever care to know about them. But I know when they're happy. I also know when they're sad. I can see it, right? In fact, my kids get a little bit angry with me and their mom whenever I say something like, I tell them to do something, and they give me a look, and I say, "Don't give me attitude." And their favorite thing to say is, "I didn't say anything," right? And I'm like, "I don't need you to say anything. I can see it in your eyes. Like, I know you so well that just the facial expression you just gave me is attitude. You're grounded. No, no, I don't do that. The point is that I know my child. Now, I know my children. And Jesus says that he knows his sheep just as he is known by the Father, and the Father knows him. That's the kind of intimacy that he has for you and for me and for his flock. He cares about you. But I wonder, like, as sheep, do we get distracted? Sheep are so easily distracted. Like, they just follow their nose, it seems like, in their ears, and they just follow. And before you know it, sheep can get lost, but Jesus will leave the 99 to find the one, right? But I wonder about us. Do we really attempt to know the shepherd the way that he knows us? And that's like, there's a role for you in this metaphor. It's that you need to know the shepherd. You need to hear his voice. And that's going to move me on to my next point, which is we are the sheep. See, we are the sheep. What makes the good shepherd good is so many things. The greatest thing, he's willing to lay his life down. The greater love has no one than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. Jesus is the good shepherd. He's the gate. But we are the sheep. And here's what he says in verse 16. I have other sheep that are not part of this pen, and I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. So, like, this is Jesus actually looking forward to this Gentile church, which, by the way, is like, John is writing this from Ephesus, and so he's kind of like, as he's thinking about the church in Ephesus, he might be thinking, I am pastoring a flock from a different pen. But do you notice there's only one flock and one shepherd? See that Jesus destroys the division, the dividing wall of hostility that separated Jew and Gentile, slave and free, male and female. There is one flock, and you guys are part of it. Like, you guys are so blessed to be part of that flock. What distinguishes you as part of the flock? What distinguishes you as his sheep? It's the fact that you follow his voice. See, sheep pens, like I said earlier, they would have lots of different shepherds who brought their sheep into these pens. And so once they bring their sheep into the pen, they get all mixed up. How are you going to sort that? That's going to be so crazy. But not them, because the sheep know the voice of the shepherd. And so when the shepherd comes, he calls his sheep, and those sheep follow. But that's your job, is to know the voice. And you're not the only sheep. Right? There are going to be people who are part of God's flocks that come from different cultures and backgrounds and political viewpoints and just all kinds of different sheep that are out there. What distinguishes them? They know the voice of the shepherd. And that should be you. Do you know his voice? Do you listen for his call? Or do you find yourself being lost like that one out of 99 because you got distracted? We could go on all day with this idea of the Good Shepherd, but Jesus talks about laying down his life again. I just want to point out in verse 19, he says, the Jews who heard these things were again divided. That seems like a pattern that started all the way in like chapter 5. They were divided, they were divided, they were divided. Many of them said, he's demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? I guess I could tell you why to listen to him. He's the gate. Salvation is found in no other name. Others said, these are not the sayings of a man who's possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? And I think that's the one thing that we can really consider, is that it's Jesus, not just Jesus' words that proved who he was, it was his actions. Last week we talked about the man who was born blind who's able to see. And now we're talking about sheep and shepherds and the good shepherd. He's good because he lays his life down. He's good because he brought light to a blind man who lived in darkness. He's good because he is the bread that only satisfies.